It was my wife's funeral, and this happened. The woman who walked through the cemetery gates that afternoon wore a red dress. Not black. Not navy. Red. The kind of red that screams defiance, the kind that turns every head and silences every whisper. She carried a single white envelope in her left hand and walked straight toward the front row of chairs where my family sat. My mother grabbed my arm. My brother stood up. And I, David Mensah, the man who had just buried his wife 40 minutes earlier, felt the ground tilt beneath me because I had never seen this woman before in my entire life. But she knew my name. She knew my wife's name. And what she handed me in that envelope would unravel everything I thought I knew about the woman I had been married to for 11 years. Before I go any further, if stories like this move you, if they make you think, if they remind you that life is stranger and more beautiful than we could ever imagine, please take 1 second to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. It means the world to me, and it helps me keep sharing stories that matter. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is David. I grew up in a small town outside Kumasi, the kind of place where everybody knows your business before you do. My father was a carpenter who built church pews and coffins with the same pair of hands, and my mother sold groundnuts at the roadside to make sure my brother Samuel and I could afford school uniforms. We were not rich by any measure, but we were not broken either. My parents had this quiet understanding between them, a rhythm that did not need music. My father would come home covered in sawdust, and my mother would brush his shoulders without a word, and something about that image carved itself into me. I told myself that when I found love, it would look exactly like that. Quiet. Steady. Unshakable. I met Grace Owusu when I was 26 years old. I had moved to Accra to work as an electrician, doing contract jobs for construction companies, wiring new buildings, fixing old ones. The pay was inconsistent, but I was young and stubborn and convinced that the city would eventually open its arms to me. Grace worked at a pharmacy 3 streets from the room I was renting. I walked in one afternoon with a headache so terrible I could barely see straight, and she was behind the counter, arranging boxes of paracetamol with the kind of precision that made me think she was counting them. She looked up, and I swear the headache got worse because my heart started doing something it had never done before. She was not the kind of beautiful that shouts at you from across a room. Grace was the kind of beautiful that sneaks up on you, that reveals itself slowly, in layers. The way her eyes narrowed slightly when she smiled. The way she tilted her head when she was listening, really listening. The small gap between her front teeth that she was self-conscious about but that I found absolutely perfect. I bought the paracetamol and came back the next day for vitamins I did not need. And the day after that for plasters. And the day after that for nothing at all except the courage to say what I had been rehearsing in front of my bathroom mirror for 72 hours. I think I have been coming here too much, I said. She looked at me with those narrowed eyes and said, I know. You bought 3 boxes of cough syrup this week and you do not have a cough. We both laughed, and something unlocked between us. That was the beginning. Grace and I dated for 2 years before I married her. Those 2 years taught me things about love that no sermon or song could have. Grace was fiercely independent. She had grown up in Takoradi with her grandmother after losing both parents in a car accident when she was 9. Her grandmother, a woman she called Nana Ama, had raised her on market earnings and sheer willpower. Grace never talked much about her childhood. When I asked, she would give me small pieces, like someone breaking off corners of bread to share, enough to taste but never the full loaf. I did not push. I told myself that when she was ready, she would open up completely. In the meantime, I fell deeper in love with the woman standing in front of me, the one who laughed too loudly at bad jokes, who hummed hymns while cooking jollof rice, who cried at the news when she saw stories about children suffering, and who kissed my forehead every single night before bed and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." We got married in a small ceremony. My parents came from Kumasi. Her grandmother was too ill to travel but sent a blessing through a letter that the pastor read aloud. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Kasoa, nothing fancy, but it was ours. I remember the first night in that apartment, sitting on the floor because our furniture had not arrived yet, eating fried plantain from a plastic bag, and Grace looked at me and said, "David, promise me something. Whatever happens, whatever you find out about me, remember this night. Remember that I loved you before anything complicated got in the way." I thought it was just one of those deep, sentimental things people say when they are emotional. I kissed her and promised. I had no idea she was preparing me for something. The years moved the way years do when you are building a life. Grace got a better job at a hospital pharmacy. I started my own small electrical company. We had our first child, a boy we named Kwame, and 2 years later, our daughter Augustina arrived. Life was not always smooth. There were months when contracts dried up and I could not pay school fees on time. There were arguments about money, about my long hours, about the fact that Grace sometimes disappeared into herself for days, becoming quiet and distant in a way that felt like she had traveled somewhere I could not follow. But we always came back to each other. We always found that rhythm my parents had taught me to look for. Then Grace got sick. It started with tiredness. Not the normal tiredness of a mother with 2 young children, but something heavier, something that lived in her bones. She would fall asleep at the dinner table. She lost weight rapidly. Her skin, which had always glowed, became dull and dry. I begged her to see a doctor and she kept saying she was fine, just stressed, just tired. When she finally agreed to go, the diagnosis came like a phone call in the middle of the night. Breast cancer. Stage 3. I will not describe in detail what those next 2 years looked like because if you have ever watched someone you love fight a disease that seems determined to win, you already know. You know the hospital corridors that all look the same. You know the smell of antiseptic that follows you home. You know the sound of your wife vomiting after chemotherapy and your own helplessness as you hold her hair and pretend to be strong. You know the prayers that get more desperate as the weeks pass. You know the look in your children's eyes when they ask why mummy's hair is gone and you have to find words that are honest but not terrifying. You know all of this, and I do not need to relive every moment. What I will tell you is that Grace fought. She fought with everything she had. She fought with dignity and grace and the same quiet stubbornness that had made her arrange paracetamol boxes with military precision all those years ago. And there were good days. Days when the treatment seemed to be working, when color returned to her cheeks, when she could sit in the garden and watch Kwame and Augustina play and laugh, and for a moment, just a moment, we could pretend that everything was going to be fine. But cancer does not care about your good days. It keeps its own calendar. Grace died on a Tuesday morning in March. She was 38 years old. The house was quiet. The children were at school. I was sitting beside her bed holding her hand when her breathing changed, and then stopped, and the world became a place I did not recognize anymore. I sat there for 20 minutes before I called anyone. I just sat there, holding her hand, not ready to let the machinery of death begin, the phone calls, the arrangements, the condolences, the logistics of turning a person into a memory. The funeral was held on a Saturday. The church was full. Grace had been loved by many people, colleagues from the hospital, women from the church, neighbors, old friends. My mother sat in the front row wearing white, her face a landscape of grief. My children sat on either side of me, Kwame trying to be brave at 9 years old, Augustina crying softly at 7, not fully understanding but feeling the weight of absence. The pastor spoke beautifully about Grace's kindness, her faith, her love for her family. People stood up and shared stories. I listened to all of it feeling like I was underwater, hearing everything through a thick layer of something that kept the world at a distance. After the burial, we gathered at the church grounds for the reception. That is when the woman in the red dress appeared. She walked through the gates with purpose. She was perhaps 50 years old, tall, with silver-streaked hair pulled back tightly. There was something regal about her posture, something that suggested she was not a woman who entered rooms but rather commanded them. Every pair of eyes followed her. My mother leaned over and whispered, "David, who is that?" I shook my head. I had no idea. She walked directly to me, looked me in the eyes, and said, "You are David. Grace's husband." "Yes," I said. She held out the white envelope. "My name is Augustina. Grace asked me to give this to you." She said only after. Only after she was gone. My brother Samuel stepped forward protectively. "Who are you? How do you know Grace?" Augustina looked at Samuel calmly, then back at me. "I am her mother." The words detonated in the silence. Grace's mother. Grace, whose parents had died in a car accident when she was 9. Grace, who had been raised by her grandmother. Grace, who had told me this story 100 times. "That is not possible," I said. "Her parents are dead." Augustina's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. "Her father died in that accident. I survived. But I was not fit to raise a child. I was broken in ways that had nothing to do with the car. Nana Amma took Grace because I could not take care of myself, let alone a child. Grace knew. She found me 8 years ago. She has been visiting me ever since." My mind went to all those times Grace had said she was visiting a friend. The weekends she took trips to Cape Coast that she described as work retreats. 8 years. 8 years of secret visits to a mother I did not know existed. I opened the envelope right there, standing in the cemetery with 100 people watching. Inside was a letter. 7 pages, handwritten, in Grace's careful, slanted script. I will not share every word because some of it belongs only to me, but I will share what matters. Grace wrote that she had discovered her mother was alive when Kwame was a baby. She had found old documents in Nana Amma's belongings during a visit, documents that showed her mother had been admitted to a psychiatric facility after the accident, not killed in it. Nana Amma, her grandmother, had made the decision to tell young Grace that both parents were gone because she believed it was simpler, cleaner, less painful than explaining that her mother was alive but unable to function, unable to love, unable to be a mother. Grace wrote that she had been furious at first. Furious at her grandmother for lying. Furious at the world for stealing her mother twice, once in the accident and once in the lie. But then she had tracked down Augustina, who by then had spent years recovering, rebuilding herself slowly and painfully in a small house in Cape Coast, living off a modest pension and the kindness of a church community that had taken her in. Grace wrote that the first time she saw her mother, she stood outside the house for an hour before knocking. And when Augustina opened the door, Grace said she recognized her own face in this stranger's features, and the anger dissolved into something she could not name. They sat together that first day and did not speak much. They just sat. And that was enough to begin. Over the next 8 years, Grace visited Augustina regularly. She helped her financially when she could. She brought photos of Kwame and Abina. She told her mother about me, about our life, about the small apartment in Kasoa and the fried plantain on the floor and the forehead kisses before bed. Augustina had never met her grandchildren. She had never met me. Grace had kept her separate, not out of shame, she wrote, but out of fear. Fear that I would feel betrayed by the secret. Fear that her grandmother, still alive at the time and in declining health, would be hurt. Fear that introducing this complicated truth into our lives would somehow fracture the peace we had built. Then Grace got sick. And suddenly, the luxury of waiting for the right time disappeared. She wrote that during her treatment, she had considered telling me everything. She had started the conversation a dozen times in her head. But each time, she looked at my face, already carrying so much worry and exhaustion, and she could not add another weight. So she made a different plan. She wrote the letter. She gave Augustina instructions. After the funeral. Only after. The last page of the letter destroyed me. Grace wrote, "David, I know you will be angry. I know you will feel like I kept something enormous from you, and you are right, I did. But I want you to understand why. My whole life was shaped by someone else's decision about what truth I could handle. Nana Amma decided I could not handle knowing my mother was alive. And maybe she was right when I was 9. But I grew up. I found the truth on my own. And I survived it. I am asking you now to do the same. Survive this truth. And then do what I could never bring myself to do. Let Augustina into our family. Let her know Kwame and Abina. Let her sit at your table and eat your terrible jollof rice. She has been alone long enough. She has carried her guilt long enough. And our children deserve to know that love does not end just because someone makes a mistake. Please, David. For me. This is the last thing I will ever ask you. I folded the letter and looked at Augustina. She was standing there, trembling slightly, tears running down her face, waiting for my verdict. This woman who had lost everything, her husband, her daughter, her mind, and then slowly, agonizingly, rebuilt herself only to lose her daughter again to cancer. This woman who had spent 8 years loving Grace in secret, just as Grace had spent 8 years loving her in secret. 2 women, bound by blood and broken by circumstance, finding each other in the margins of a life I thought I knew completely. My mother was watching me. My brother was watching me. The entire funeral gathering was watching me, even though most of them had no idea what was happening. They only saw a man holding a letter and a stranger in a red dress and the charged silence between them. I wish I could tell you I was immediately gracious. I was not. The first thing I felt was betrayal. Pure, hot, blinding betrayal. My wife had lied to me for 8 years. Not a small lie, not an omission about a forgotten bill or a dented car. A lie about a living, breathing human being. A mother. Her mother. Our children's grandmother. How many times had I held Grace in the dark and asked her to tell me what was bothering her? How many times had she said, nothing, when the answer was this enormous, living secret? I looked at Augustina and said, I need time. She nodded. She understood. She gave me a phone number written on a small piece of paper and turned to leave. She made it about 10 steps before I called out to her. Augustina. She stopped. What is the red dress for? She turned around and managed a small, shaking smile. Grace told me not to wear black. She said funerals have enough darkness. She said if I was going to meet her family for the first time, I should wear something that looks like I am not afraid. That broke me. Because that was Grace. That was exactly, perfectly, unmistakably Grace. The woman who hummed hymns while cooking. The woman who cried at the news. The woman who kissed my forehead and whispered thank you. The woman who even in death was still orchestrating love, still pushing the people she cared about toward each other, still refusing to let fear win. I did not invite Augustina back to the reception that day. I was not ready. But I called her 3 weeks later. We met at a small restaurant in Cape Coast. We sat across from each other and I asked her to tell me everything. She did. She told me about the accident, how the car had rolled 3 times, how her husband had died instantly, how she had survived with a shattered pelvis and a shattered mind. She told me about the years in the psychiatric facility, the darkness that swallowed her, the slow climb back to something resembling sanity. She told me about the guilt of knowing her daughter was growing up without her, believing she was dead, and how that guilt became its own prison. She told me about the day Grace appeared at her door, and how she had fallen to her knees because she thought it was a hallucination, because her mind had played tricks on her before, but this time the hallucination spoke, and said, Mama, I am real. I cried in that restaurant. Openly, messily, without shame. Because I realized something. Grace had not lied to me out of cruelty or distrust. She had lied to me the same way Nana Amma had lied to her, out of a desperate, misguided, deeply human desire to protect the people she loved from pain she did not know how to explain. Was it right? No. Was it understandable? Completely. A month after that meeting, I brought Kwame and Abina to Cape Coast. Augustina had prepared food and cleaned her small house until it sparkled. She stood in the doorway as we arrived, and I could see her hands shaking. Kwame, who had his mother's quiet observance, looked at Augustina and then looked at me and said, "Papa, she looks like Mama." "She does," I said. "She is Mama's mother. Your grandmother." Abina, who had always been the bolder of my two children, walked straight up to Augustina and said, "My Mama is in heaven now." Augustina knelt down, tears streaming, and said, "I know, my darling. But she sent me to you." That first visit lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, Kwame was showing Augustina a game on my phone and Abina was sitting in her lap, playing with her silver-streaked hair. Something was knitting itself together that afternoon, something fragile and new and imperfect but real. Over the following months, Augustina became a fixture in our lives. She visited Kasoa. She learned Kwame's favorite foods. She braided Abina's hair the way Grace used to, and when I saw her doing it, I had to leave the room because the resemblance between mother and daughter was almost too much to bear. My own mother, to her everlasting credit, welcomed Augustina with open arms. "That woman has suffered enough," she told me one evening. Grace knew what she was doing. There were hard days. Days when I found myself angry at Grace all over again. Days when I would be driving and suddenly grip the steering wheel and think, "Why did you not trust me? Why did you carry this alone? Was I not enough for you to lean on?" Those questions have no answers, not from Grace anyway. She took her reasons with her. All she left me was the letter, and the instruction to choose love over anger. It has been 2 years now since that funeral. 2 years since a woman in a red dress walked into my life and turned everything I knew inside out. Augustina is 71 years old.